A couple of years ago, I scored a 60 on the first test in my US history class, which motivated me to change things up a bit and start a study group for that course. On the next test, I made a 95. And ever since that point, I have been a huge advocate and user of study groups in order to do better on exams. In talking to my friends, I found that most students seem to not understand the huge benefits that study groups can provide, or we've been in a study group that's not worked well in the past that's kind of turned us off to the idea. So in this video, I'm going to be talking about the 5 ways in which study groups boost our grades, as well as how to set up an effective study group from my experience in the last couple of years. In my experience, there are 5 big benefits to study groups. The first one is that it prevents procrastinating studying for a test. Before I started studying in study groups, it was really easy for me to wait until the last minute to study for the exam, because I think if the exam's on Wednesday, then as long as I'm fully studied by like Tuesday, then I'm fine. The problem is that doesn't leave a lot of time for buffer for if something goes wrong during the studying process. Or if I start studying and I realize that there are several concepts that I didn't even realize that I need to work on reviewing. I don't want to have that problem the night before the exam. And so the cool thing for me is that having a study group moves that deadline in my head for when I need to have all the content studied. It moves that back by a few days. Because of course I want to make sure that I have all the information in my head before I meet to study with another person. And now after our study session, because I didn't wait till the last minute to study, I now have several days of buffer that I can use to work on the things that came up in the study group that now I need to work on. The second big benefit of study groups for me is that it is study time marked on the calendar. This results in me spending more time studying than I would otherwise. Now, for example, I might get a message from somebody in my class saying, hey, who wants to get together and study on Sunday afternoon for 3 hours? I'll think to myself, well, it'd actually be more efficient if I spent 3 hours studying by myself than if I studied with somebody. And so I'll plan to study by myself. And then a lot of times I don't actually end up spending time studying over the weekend. And so in hindsight, I realize I would have actually spent more time studying if I had said yes, because it would have been on my calendar and I would have put in the time to do it. The third big benefit of study groups is that it enables diagnosing and filling in gaps in my knowledge. When I read over my notes, it's really easy to skim over certain sections and miss important details. And then every time I read over it, I miss the same information. Whereas when I'm studying with somebody, they're coming at it from a different perspective. And so they're more easily able to point out the things in my knowledge base that are lacking that I need to study up on before the next exam. And then once we diagnose the holes in our understanding, we're able to all get together and sort of crowdsource what the information is that we're missing. So one person's on Google, one person's flipping through the textbook, we're all comparing our notes so that we get a full picture of what the content is. And this ability to crowdsource information from an entire group, I found especially helpful in classes where recording the lectures is prohibited. So the fourth benefit is that we remember the information better if we were studying it with another person. So in my head, there are 2 options. Either I don't remember the content or the person I'm studying with doesn't remember a particular concept. Either way, I think works out to our benefit. If I don't understand a concept and my friend is explaining the concept to me, I'm much more likely to be able to remember his explanation and remember that concept than if I was simply trying to figure out the answer in the textbook. And that's because the partner who I'm studying with is likely to be able to understand why I don't understand and reverse engineer the situation from that point. This sort of harkens back to the concept of the curse of knowledge, which is the idea that people who are experts in a field have difficulty explaining concepts to people who are complete beginners because they've been an expert for so long that they can't remember what it was like to not understand. And so it's hard for them to target and pinpoint the parts that you don't understand. So if I don't understand something and my partner explains it to me, I'm likely to remember that information much, much better and for a much longer period of time, ideally until the exam is over, than I would if I was simply studying it by myself. On the flip side, let's say that I remember a concept, but the person I'm studying with doesn't understand the concept. This gives me a perfect opportunity to utilize the Feynman technique, which is the idea that one of the best ways to memorize content and to be able to get full understanding of that concept is by teaching it to another person. Studies have shown that teaching something to another person is one of the best ways to solidify that information in our brain and boost retention of that concept. The other benefit is that it exposes the gaps in our understanding. If I'm explaining something to my friend and he starts asking questions, well, what about this? Well, what about this? It very quickly exposes the parts of the concept that I understand versus the parts that I don't understand and I need to do more research on before the next test. And that is completely invaluable. The last big advantage of study groups is peer-to-peer accountability, When I know that we're meeting on Sunday afternoon at the library, I am much more likely to put in my time to read the textbook, to arrive to class on time, and to pay attention and take good notes, because there's this sense of accountability with my group. Now let's talk about how to set up an effective study group. There are several things to keep in mind. Let's look at them real quick. First, you have to initiate. There is almost zero chance that somebody will invite you to join their study group. That's just not how it works. Part of the reason why is because people don't realize how great study groups actually are. So you have to go out there and pick people and ask them to join your study group. It doesn't work the other way around. Second, assemble a stacked team. The reason why a lot of us hate study groups is the same reason why we dislike group projects, because it only takes one person to throw the entire thing for everybody and to ruin everyone's experience. For that reason, we should not do open invites. Instead, we should deliberately pick out people who we think care about the class and are good students in order to be in our study group. For me, starting on day one of class, I literally have a notepad and I'm writing down people's names who I think, looking around, I would want to be in my study group. I'm paying very close attention to who around me is on time to class, who's arriving to every class, who looks like they're taking good notes, and who's asking insightful questions and being actively engaged in the conversation with the professor in class. Another thing that I look for is trying to find somebody to put on my team, so to speak, for our group who reads the textbook. I don't always read the textbook, but it's super useful because sometimes there will be some bits of information that you will only find in the textbook. And as we are going through our notes, they will be able to provide unique insights. So I deliberately try to find people who read the textbook to put on my team. So I'll just start asking around like, hey, do y'all actually read the textbook? And I try to find somebody who does, get them on my team. Next tip, smaller is better. In my experience, a smaller study group of 2 or 3 people is the ideal size for a study group. Any more people and you find that you don't get any additional benefit, but there are significant drawbacks, predominantly scheduling. It's nearly impossible to find a time that works for a large group of people, so narrowing that group down means you'll actually be able to find a time to get together. The other obvious problem of a big group is that it's really hard to keep everybody undistracted and on the same page. Imagine trying to run a marathon with 20 friends. Unless you train every single day together, you're going to be all over the place. And the exact same thing applies to study groups. Another thing I found that's kind of fun is math study groups. Now, I've found that the best way to study for math is by working problems, not doing things collaboratively. So I always wrote off the idea of doing a study group. But I found recently that getting together to work on math problems with people at the library or on Zoom or whatever, where we all just work in silence on our own projects, is actually really fun. And if somebody does have a question every once in a while, they can pop up with a question and we can help them. Math study groups are actually really underrated, so maybe give them a shot. Another thing I've realized is we can do this same principle, but do it so that we can do it with all different kinds of subjects. So I'm studying math, somebody else is studying English, somebody else is working on lit, and that's totally fine. We all get together and study together, but all in silence, and that is a very, very effective way of studying that takes advantage of a lot of the advantages that we talked about earlier, but in a way that is compatible. 3 more quick tips. First, do not be afraid to set up a study group in the middle of the semester. What I found is that a lot of the time after a really difficult test, when everyone gets back super low grades, that is when people are most receptive to accepting the offer to join your study group. So strike while the iron's hot. Halfway through the year is a perfect time to start up a study group. Second, take advantage of networking resources. Both Blackboard and Canvas have tools in which you can directly message a person from your class. So if you don't have somebody's phone number, you can still reach out to them to ask them to join a study group without throwing a big open invite. Lastly, try to view study groups as a low pressure situation. Remember that if you get into a study group and it doesn't go well, you can always quit and just join a different group, and nobody's really going to care. So don't be intimidated to start a group because you're afraid that maybe it won't work out and then you'll be stuck. You can always just quit. And with that, good luck. Go out there and set up an awesome study group. Hopefully these techniques will help you out in doing so. Until next time, have a great day. Cheers.